Hello, this is Angie Yingst, and you're listening to Centered, grounded conversations about the metaphysical.
Blessed September. This is Centered, and I am your dungeon master through the role-playing game that is your life, Angie Yingst. No, I'm just kidding. I am your DJ. No, I'm the goofy Earth Medicine cruise director through the astrology for September, and then the Earth Medicine that might actually get you through this time without a felony. So it is the beginning of school season here in the United States, which often feels like the new dawn for all of us. But September, we're kind of looking at some shadowy, eclipsey, retrogrady energy that actually might put us in detention. But September 2025 is actually an astrologically significant month because it marks a lot of shifts. We start with Saturn retrograde re-entering Pisces. We have 2 eclipses, a total lunar eclipse on the 7th, and then a partial solar eclipse on the 21st. And all these events point to themes of closure, spiritual clarity, emotional boundaries, and recalibrating our routines in response to those things. Later in the month, the Sun and Mars enter Libra, and that shifts our focus to expansion, communication, and magnetism, while Venus also enters Virgo, and that brings focus on work-life balance and discernment. But we're pretty much kicking September off in what is the hallmarks of a robust shadow season. So welcome to shadow season. I feel like I need a air horn sound or something here. But eclipse season really returns this September, bringing a wave of intensity right before the autumn sort of settles in. But I've been talking about this for a few months, and I know a lot of astrologers have, because this is a month that big shifts are happening. So while we kind of begin on a more reflective note as Saturn retrograde moves back into Pisces. So what does this mean? Okay, so finally we moved Saturn out of Pisces, and now she's going back in. That's because when a planet is retrograde, it doesn't move forward through the constellation. We think forward through the constellations. We're going to go in that order of how it appears in the calendar, right? So Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, blah, 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 all the way back up to Pisces. So, we moved into Aries, and now we're kind of retrograding back into Pisces. So what does that mean? It basically means, also Neptune moved from Pisces to Aries. So now that Saturn's back into Aries, it kind of means what we're looking at is finishing up some of that work that happened when Saturn was in Pisces. So Neptune and Saturn working together is kind of the important part, one of the important parts of this transit. Not to say that one or the other isn't important in and of itself, but because they're both here in Aries and then they're moving back into Pisces, we're basically at these cross purposes, right? A paradox that I hope you can see the significance of, because Saturn creates rules and boundaries and structures, and Neptune disintegrates them. But then Saturn rebuilds them. So it can be a painful process, but important. So last time Saturn was in Aries was 30 years ago, back in another century. So we had a glimpse of what our next 2.5 years will be like from May, Saturn and Neptune both went into Aries. I think maybe Neptune was I don't know if it was May or a little bit in April, but so from May to September, we're experiencing Neptune and Saturn in Aries. Then, Saturn goes back to Pisces, and so now we're revisiting that Piscean energy around our Saturnian issues, because Saturn in retrograde, it doesn't really care. Saturn doesn't really care for Piscean energy too much. It's too flowy. too watery. So we may find ourselves in emotional places as this kind of hits, right? So this happened September 1st. So Saturn and retrograde enters Pisces, and that means we've been dealing with, Saturn and Aries. Now we're going back to Pisces, and that encourages like a really deep dive into emotional clarity and boundaries around, like I should say, emotional clarity around boundaries. So this brings a chance for us to revisit and reinforce our boundaries, particularly our emotional boundaries. Focus on our self-care, focus on our structure. What is the structure? And when we deal with those issues, it doesn't mean, oh, I know exactly what to do. It means we don't know what to do, right? So when we're dealing with those issues, it's us really sometimes learning the hard way, having issues arise that kind of challenge those things. After kind of dipping a toe in Aries, the transit gives us that chance to go back and finish some of the work that we were doing the past 2.5 years as Saturn's been in Pisces. So you can kind of think of that as what has happened with boundaries for you, what has happened with your Saturn issues, which are like structure and rules and it like discipline and all that stuff. So we're like able to kind of fix what was not totally firmed up. So, and a lot of this has to go around where our structures are in our self. Like where do they need rebuilding? Where do they need fortification? Think about the stuff that has was left undone around that. Like, did you feel like the conversation just somebody walked away from it rather than finishing it up? That feeling of like, well, we had the conversation, but nothing was resolved. This is the time you get to resolve it, because Saturn in Pisces will happen until February 2026. So, Saturn will station direct November 27th. So, it can be a time, in this frame where we're going to be seeing some of the shadow stuff in that time between now and November 27th. And then we can start to work on resolving that Piscean Saturn mix and then move forward. This is also a great time because of Pisces to really look at creativity and making time for arts and crafts and self-expression and what kind of structures we can put in place to really get our creative side flowing. Now, this is a time that can be super emotional and we'll want to elevate self-care as well. It doesn't just happen that we can ignore that part of us. So on the 2nd, Mercury steps into Virgo, and this is one of Mercury's favorite placements. So this is a great time for analytical work, for speaking, for talking, for writing, for journaling. So communication needs to be precise, but you'll kind of watch as like a little bit of, watching what you're saying can go a long way. And then Mercury leaves Virgo on the 18th. So you do have some weeks with this. On the 6th, another retrograde happens, and Uranus joins Saturn and begins its annual retrograde. And that just kind of brings disruptions to our life. But in that way, Uranus loves disruption. It favors change. So the retrograde will really say like, okay, this might not be the best time to make changes. And again, we're kind of not changing big things in our life. That doesn't mean we can't do anything. It just means, because we're expecting these disruptions to come in, particularly around our mindset, our communication, our curiosity, our spontaneity. When we're going through that, we want to look to see like, okay, where can I review this? Where can I process this rather than just tear it down and be like, I'm done, or I'm destroying this because I need it to change right now. This is sort of the shadow stuff we end up dealing with, right? Which is the sense of urgency we have, the sense of like, this has to happen this way right now, and then realize later like, oh, I should have waited on that. I should have thought about it a little longer. So, another thing that happens when Uranus goes retrograde is we may see people from the past or deal with things from the past. And that's good. This is a time to schedule those, meetups and things like that. Now, on September 7th, there's a total lunar eclipse, and this is the total lunar eclipse in Pisces that everybody's been talking about. So, like Houston, we have a problem, and it's emotional, so send hugs. But for real, we're in this extended dance remix of Piscean eclipse season, because we basically have 3 lunar eclipses in Pisces in a row, one for each year for 3 years. So this second of the 3 eclipses in Pisces harkens back to the lunar eclipse in September. Are you seeing a theme here of like looking back and like closing chapters out from old stuff? Well, that's kind of what this lunation is. We're in a series. There'll be another Piscean lunar eclipse in September of 2026. So, because this is continuing work, you want to look at like, what did this lunation, like what happened during the last lunar eclipse? Like, did you journal? Do you keep journals? This is why keeping journals can be so helpful, because we can kind of go back and like, oh, this is what I was wrestling with at that time. And because we already have gone through it, we may know what is involved. And Chinny Nicholas says eclipses turn the lights on and off. So like we see things and then we go back in the dark and we do that shadow work, and then turn the lights on, and then we go back in the shadow work. But what she said is like, this is like a trilogy, like you're reading a 3 novels, right? And so by the second one, you already know all the characters, you know the villains, you know what's happening. And she said that's kind of where this is good, right? Because we already know what we're kind of dealing with at this time frame. So, as we experience all of this eclipse energy, because there's another eclipse this month, we're going to feel that drama. We're going to feel that emotionality come in, particularly in the Piscean North Node, right? So what does this have to do with your life? Like, what aspect is it going to be dealing with? Well, when we're in Pisces, we're dreaming. We kind of have like, what is our goal? What is our dream of dreams? What intentions have we set? Maybe long ago. Maybe it's just like that intention that keeps coming up, for us. This is what I want. This is what I want to happen. So, our issue kind of with Pisces is Pisces really is so watery. It goes and flows anywhere there's an opening, right? That's what happens. And so we kind of can want to go in 2 directions. We might want all the things. In the immortal words of Hole, we may want to be the girl with the most cake, right? But of all the things that come up, we need to kind of choose what is most important to us. And that's incredibly emotional, because not only do we have to choose, that means we're giving up something that is like maybe part of our dream. But ultimately, this is about the situation you want to have. Like, what do you want? How do you want to feel? I mean, Pisces is about feeling, so think about it that way. What do you want to feel? Who do you want to be? Those are the decisions that kind of come up around eclipses. Just that little stuff. Who do you want to be in the world? And that's kind of the heaviness of eclipses. It just brings this culmination energy. And it feels like you can really see what's standing in the way of the intention you set at the new moon. For example, if, we can think of this as, this is the full moon. So we really are kind of looking at this. What am I ready to release? What is standing in my way? And so we may want to like explode that. Or we can just notice it, put energy into the path that gets you to the place you want to go, rather than energy on what's blocking you. So just know that emotions will be strong. And again, boundaries it's all about boundaries this month too, so they can be really blurry, especially with, this Saturn retrograde in Pisces, and then us kind of dealing with this eclipse in Pisces, with just a lot of shadowy stuff. And Pisces loves a little escapism and dissociative dreaming and self-medicating. So it's really important for you to ground, to examine idealism, and make sure we're not living in la la land, and focus on the tangibilities of what we want. With the Sun in Virgo, I'm always going to encourage you to fall into your routine and do the next right thing and make a to-do list and color code the hell out of your life, because routines can help you right now. That's the structure. The one thing that you don't want to do, which is the thing my husband always says to the children, which is close the loop, like don't just like pull out the cereal and pull out the bowl and pour the cereal and pour the milk and leave the cereal on the counter with the milk on the counter. Close the loop, so to speak. So trust your feelings and reinforce boundaries as needed, but just understand that this can be like a test to your faith. And so when it feels urgent, right? And so we do like run right over our boundaries when we're feeling that urgency. So it's really wise to breathe, remain grounded and flexible, but know when to hold fast and when to let go. A sacrifice is called for, but trust is kind of a necessary part of that. And the more willing you are to release, the better you'll feel. I'm ready to let this go. I'm ready to go where I'm supposed to be, right? Not where I'm thinking like that's the most pleasure I'm going to get, if that makes sense. So this is a wonderful lunation to kind of complete projects and to engage in spiritual practices and elevate self-care and not avoid feelings. So the next 2 weeks until solar eclipse in Virgo are going to feel like you're in a non-stop eclipse, because things happen and shift, and then lights will be turned on to certain things and off to others. We will feel like decisions need to be made right now. And so we can really work with that shadowy energy of urgency. And the things like we need to pay attention to and maybe need to do our work around are those things like what is urgently being demanded of us, and is it so urgent? What unconscious aspects of the self are demanding our attention? So sometimes like what'll happen is things will feel really urgent, like I have to make a decision right now about this, and then we look at that and we realize that's not actually the thing, right? Like it's demanding our attention because what needs our attention is something much deeper and harder to look at, right? So we have to go to look at the thing behind the thing behind the thing, and that is difficult, It's not always what we want to do, especially when we're decision making about our lives and decision making about our path forward. So we kind of have to look at our own need to dissociate, our own, desire to dissociate. When I say that, people act like dissociation is something that they never do. But we do it all the time, like playing games on your phone, scrolling TikTok, scrolling the reels on Instagram or whatever it is, or YouTube. People have affairs, people gossip, people focus on things that have nothing to do with them, that really is not their business at all. It's, can be misplaced anger or misplaced fear or misplaced whatever. We do all kinds of things that help us cope with not wanting to look at what we need to look at to change ourselves. And so eclipses are like hotbeds of those kind of behaviors. Like they kind of push us into like shadow work, and shadow work is what people are like, I'd rather just keep that in the closet, Remember, stay here, stay present, look at yourself, don't run away, don't cut and run from you, just try to stay. How many times did you make a promise to yourself that you didn't keep? Okay, this is what we're staying present for. You have a dream, you have something that wants to get done, and you're being shown the things standing in the way of it coming together for you. This is a gift. It is a gift to be able to see that. But if it's hard to do it alone because you're a cut and runner or you're a dissociator, get a guide, a therapist, a spiritual advisor, healer, mentor, teacher, parent, wise friend, doesn't matter. But we don't need to do it alone. Just make sure that person has like a good head on their shoulders, right? As the wolf said, there's always a pack of weirdos for you somewhere, right? So on the 13th, there's a Mercury cazimi, which is always fun. And then on the 18th, Mercury leaves Virgo for Libra, and that makes our thinking like more balanced and objective and fair. And, it's really a wonderful transit for creative thinking. And so this is a good time to, kind of think about communication and negotiations and a lot of tact. And that'll happen until October 6th. And then on the 19th, Venus moves into Virgo, and that's a great placement for love. Now, it isn't a great placement in terms of like the warm and fuzzies, but it is like clean, healthy communication. Virgo loves acts of service, and those things can really be the important part of romantic relationships. So let's move into the partial solar eclipse in Virgo on September 21st, this is the last eclipse of the year. This is a solar one in Virgo, so this is your best chance for kind of a clean break. This is gonna, so solar eclipses happen at the new moon, and lunar eclipses happen at the full moon, right? Obviously, because you see the full moon and then you see it eclipsed, right? So we kind of think about like in the solar eclipses, like the light gets eclipsed, and this isn't a total one, so we're looking at what's eclipsing, like us seeing things clearly. And because it's in Virgo, again, I'm going to just suggest that you go into the things that help you create kind of structure and a nice balance of energy. So decluttering, cleaning, weeding, all those things are going to be good at this time. But decision making, not so good. So just put those things off for a couple days until you can like make clear decisions, because again, this is a shadowy time. On the 22nd, the sun moves into Libra, marking the official beginning of fall. So we're kind of thinking about relationships, balance, art, beauty. The sun in Libra is a nice time, generally. And strengthening partnerships can be important. And then that happens, of course, for a month, because basically every 28 days the sun moves into a new constellation. And so right now it is in Virgo and it'll move to Libra. So there is a lot of energy in September. And with all this energy, it really is about staying flexible. Don't overdo it. Unschedule yourself, opt out of gatherings that are emotionally charged unless you can't, and then if you must, listen more than you speak. Breathe before responding. Use your big girl words like no and ouch and thank you. And one of the things that I love Chani Nicholas kind of says is that this is just a time of accountability. And I think what she says is that eclipses are weighty for us in our spiritual work, and if we're doing what we're supposed to do, and if our behavior is aligned with our integrity, if we do our work normally, then we usually do pretty well in heavy astrological times. But if we're misaligned, if we're not aware of our shadowy instincts, if we work basically by cutting and running and numbing ourselves, then we're not going to have an easy time during eclipse season. It's going to feel like things are hard. And this is particularly true if your boundaries are crappy and your morals are crappier. So this is a time to appreciate our spiritual work. And as we say in recovery, thank you, God, for another fucking growth opportunity. So the main themes of September are closure and renewal. We're going to kind of begin with a focus on endings and spiritual repair and karmic residue, and move, into renewal and rebirth. We're getting some system upgrades, so to speak. So we're looking at our habits, our routines, our foundations, because Virgo is around, and Virgo really emphasizes authentic self-care. And when I say authentic, I mean the self-care that actually is about, taking care of the self and mothering or fathering the self, not kind of indulging the self. Saturn retrograde's return to Pisces offers another opportunity to clarify and assert your boundaries in various aspects of life. And then reimagining routines with Mercury and Virgo. And we're shifting energies, of course, because the Sun and Mars entering entering Libra is really going to be about moving the focus to expansion, and that's a different theme than with Virgo. So our themes are pretty clear: closure, renewal, system upgrades, emotional boundaries, reimagined routines, and shifts towards community and expansion. And that's where our earth medicines come in to really support the work. So our earth medicine for this month, like every month this year, I picked in my calendar work, and I'm kind of using that. So Zinnia is our first one, and then we have Sapphire and Wolf. Okay, so let's kind of get into it. So Zinnia really comes as a reminder that healing isn't always solemn and shadow work heavy. We can be joyful and colorful and playful. Spiritually, Zinnias carry that medicine of endurance and friendship. They're the bloom that says, I'll stick around even when life gets kind of hot and dusty. In flower magic, they're used to kind of spark childlike wonder and laughter and delight. It's the kind of heart medicine that comes when you let yourself laugh with a friend or stop to notice the beauty of a butterfly. It is really just this wonderful curiosity energy and awe energy. So in spell work, Zinnia are used to usually strengthen bonds of friendship and call in loyal companions. They're kind of solar flowers, and they carry the energy of the sun. So they're creative and vital, and you can put them on the altars for ancestors. I have them on my card for October as well. We'll be working with marigold in October, but I thought I would weave them in here. And part of the energy is that I actually have Dahlia on September, and I thought it was Zinnia, so I just researched the hell out of Zinnia, and then I thought, I think Zinnia is supposed to come forward because all my Zinnia are still blooming. They're all so beautiful, and not that Dahlia isn't its own energy, So if you feel really called to work with Dahlia instead. But I felt like I had to shift that up a little bit. So yeah, we're placing them on altars for ancestors. We're weaving them to rituals where you're calling back joy after a heavy period. So you can pair them with marigold or mugwort if you're working with dream work. Zinnia can bring that splash of color to dreams. Now, Zinnia were sacred to the Aztec, who used them in various rituals and ceremonies. You don't really see them in the medicine in Europe because they're not indigenous to Europe. They're indigenous to the Americas. So seeing them as symbolic of the sun, they were given as tributes to the gods in Aztec culture. And on the healing side, they've been used in Mexican and indigenous folk medicine for a long time. Brazilian curanderas use Zinnia in healing ceremonies. They put the leaves on top of the patient's head for curing madness. They were put in ritual baths as part of a healing ceremony. In the North American Southwest, the Diné people used Zinnia flowers as sacred life medicine. In somewhat similar fashion, the Pueblo people used Zinnia to feed to children. They believed that would make them eloquent and intelligent. But the major beneficial compounds in Zinnia flowers are saponins, glycosides, flavonoids, steroids, phenols, and they've been shown to have antioxidative qualities in addition to antifungal, phytoremediative, I hope I pronounced that right, and different protective properties. They're also wonderful as pollinators. So the bees, the butterflies, we have hummingbirds out the wazoo right now. They can't resist their dazzling colors, their tasty nectar. And so while pollinators have always been important, we really do need to watch our pollinator habitats and create more pollinator habitats. And zinnia's ability to endure and thrive in all conditions are part of the medicine. And I think we have to remember that zinnia really are so easy to grow. They, survive everywhere. In fact, they were the first flower grown successfully on the International Space Station. So kind of, thinking about survival and enduring and thriving is part of zinnia's medicine. And various Native American cultures recognize zinnia's ability to endure harsh conditions and viewed them as symbolic of endurance and perseverance. So infusions of the flowers have been used with wound healing, digestive discomfort, to ease inflammation, and those, of course, may not be as well documented as something like chamomile or calendula, but that's because, the origins are kind of less of the written history, right? But we do know they've been a folk ally for resilience and recovery, mirroring their own hardy nature in the garden. Victorians actually gave the zinnia a meaning of lasting affection and daily remembrance. And to me, they hold that reminder that connection doesn't require constant tending, right? Like, have you had those friendships that you don't have to talk every day, but when you talk, it's like you're instantly back there? They just bloom steadily, season after season. And so trust that love stretches over time and distance, so they come in for that medicine of friendship and trust. So they are wonderful allies in the garden and wonderful allies as part of your earth medicine journey. So I think they're kind of bringing forth that joy that we can get even in the midst of shadow work and play, and our friendships. We can kind of cultivate our friendships, but also survival, and being able to endure and persevere. So our stone medicine this month is sapphire, and that carries the medicine of clarity, truth, and devotion. Known as a stone of wisdom, sapphire is tied to spirituality, sacred vows, and royalty, and asks us to align with what is eternal, to speak with integrity, and to trust the clear voice of our higher self. Now, sapphire is a variety of corundum. It's the same mineral as ruby. They're both composed of aluminum oxide, and then those trace elements give them color. For blue sapphire, which is the sapphire we're working with, it's iron and titanium that kind of create that iconic deep blue. On the Mohs hardness scale, sapphire rates one of the highest. It's a 9. So it's a hard natural gemstone, so you'll see a lot of jewelry made out of that. Now, why? So when they're carving or faceting gemstones, the harder the better, because then they don't crack easily. So that's kind of why, they're valued. So sapphires form from metamorphic and igneous rocks, often under high pressure environments, and some of the most famous sapphires come from Sri Lanka, Kashmir, Myanmar, with significant deposits in Madagascar, Australia, and Montana. And their durability and brilliance are part of the reason that they're so connected. Now, from a spiritual or healing perspective, sapphire is considered a stone of divine insight and sacred truth. And in magical practice, it's used for enhancing intuition and doing psychic work or third eye work, aligning with your divine will, loyalty and commitment. That's like the traditional stone of making sacred vows, spiritual oath. Even engagement rings that are made out of sapphire are said to kind of work within that realm. And then protection from deception. So it cuts through illusions and falsehoods with kind of that sword-like sharpness. And that can be what's really important during this time, to kind of work with sapphire. Sapphire is not one of those stones that you're going to go into any crystal shop and just buy a sapphire. They're not always used because they're used so much in jewelry making. They're a little harder to find, but you can find them. They particularly resonate in the throat chakra and amplify truth telling and clear communication, and they help you speak from a place of deep integrity. So in energy healing, we use it in the crown for focus and discipline and calm, for emotional regulation, cooling anger, soothing volatile emotions, strengthening your spiritual connection, and then encouraging faith and trust. So that's kind of the message of sapphire, and it really teaches us like strength comes from clarity and truth, not from avoidance. So because the stone is so unyielding and brilliant, it invites us into this higher wisdom to really speak our truth, and that's super beautiful. Now, the phrase I used in September moves us beautifully from sapphire to our animal medicine of wolf, because I wrote like howl in your own dang time. And for me, howling is a way of calling your pack to you and telling your story. And we talk about that a lot, you know. We tend to push this idea of speaking your truth and telling your story and opening your throat chakra, but it has to be in your own dang time. It cannot be prescribed. I cannot prescribe someone to tell their story to another person. Storytelling is really a vital part of our communal healing and circles, but we need to heal ourselves first. And that's really what I meant by this is, you know, we have to be emotionally ready, have strong boundaries, and not just do the storytelling of our lives because someone wants us to. It has to be in our own time. And so wolf is our next medicine that kind of moves us forward. And it is a fan favorite, the wolf. Who doesn't love the wolf? It's, you know, loyal, playful, intelligent, fierce. And working with a lot of students of shamanic healing, I know that there are so many that work with wolf. And wolf by far is the most popular of the animal guides, and no wonder. Wolf is probably the most understood and feared and hunted of the animals, but there is a lot of important medicine that comes with wolf. There are a lot of folk tales of wolf. Little Red Riding Hood, The Three Pigs, Peter and the Wolf, and in those stories, wolf is cunning and devious and obviously a predator looking for, you know, someone to eat, of course. For women of a certain age, wolf caught our attention after Dr. Clarissa Piccola Estes wrote a book called Women Who Run with Wolves, who a circle sister of mine called the Lady Bible, so which I love. But Dr. Estes says, wolves and women are relational by nature, inquiring, possessed of great endurance and strength. They're deeply intuitive, intensely concerned with their young, their mate, and their pack. Yet they've both been hounded, harassed, and falsely imputed to be devouring and devious, overly aggressive, of less value than those who are their detractors. So, you know, wolf medicine, of course, transcends gender and deals with issues like protection, ritual, loyalty, spirit, and the interplay between community and solitude. I think the latter is going to be your big medicine for September, and the way that wolf can really come forward to help, because this idea of the pack versus the lone wolf, taming versus wildness, this is sort of the epitome of the work that we're kind of doing, which is like, let me, you know, do my own stuff so then I can be of service to others, right? So, you know, wolves kind of epitomize freedom, and they're the wild spirit of nature and animals. Because of that, wolves were hunted and persecuted on a massive scale in the 19th and early 20th century. Gray wolves, which once roamed most of North America, were intentionally exterminated by government officials. And by the mid-1900s, the last population of wolves in the lower 48 states was confined to Minnesota. The animals have been protected under the Endangered Species Act since the 70s, and their populations have grown in the Great Lakes region through natural expansion and recolonization from Canada. And the same is true for the Northern Rockies. The wolves were also reintroduced to central Idaho and Yellowstone in the mid-1990s. In 2022, gray wolves in most of the United States were again protected under the Endangered Species Act, but still wolves die in the wild most often by gunshot wounds. So wolves have evolved on this planet for 35 million years. Wolves are the biggest sized member of the canid family and are the species from which our domesticated dogs come from. So that's interesting too, because we live with little wolves, right? Those of us who have dogs. There are two main species, the red wolves and the gray wolves, and close to 40 subspecies of wolf, like Arctic wolf or timber wolf, Mexican wolf. They're all found in North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia. And throughout the world, wolf has been used as a spiritual companion to the gods and goddesses. The Celts relied on wolf as a guardian spirit. In Scotland, the Gaelic creator goddess Ceach rode a wolf. I love the story of Ceach, told by the Scottish storyteller Shona Cowie, and I'll list that in the show notes. The ancient Welsh god of the moon, Ceridwen, has a wolf companion, and that wolf sources its powers from the moon. And we definitely have that connection between the wolf and the moon, because we have the howling wolf. And there's a couple others. Of course, like native cultures, wolf is considered a medicine associated with courage, strength, loyalty, and hunting. Like bears, wolves are considered closely related to humans by many North American tribes, and their origin stories, at least from some in the Northwest coastal tribes, like the Quileute and the Kwakiuti, tell their stories of their first ancestors being transformed from wolves into men. In the Shoshone mythology, wolf was the role of the creator god, while in Anishinaabe mythology, a wolf is the brother, the best friend of the cultural hero. And among the Pueblo tribes, wolves are considered one of the 6 directional guardians associated with the east and the color white, and Zunis carve stone wolf fetishes for protection, describing them healing and hunting powers, which is interesting. So wolves are also one of the most common clan animals in Native American cultures, and tribes with wolf clans include the Creek, the Cherokee, the Chippewa, the Algonquin, like the Lenape, the Shawnee, the Menominee, the Huron, the Iroquois, plains tribes like the Caddo and the Osage, southern tribes like the Chickasaw and Pueblo tribes in New Mexico and the Northwest coast like the Tlingit, and a couple other tribes from the Northwest. So wolf is considered an important clan representative and is carved on totem poles. It's also it's just, I don't know, there's wolf dances, there's all kind of wolf connections, and that's probably why when you see Native American things, like art and tools and things like that, a lot of them have carved wolves or painted wolves on them. It's an amazing animal ally, very friendly, sociable, highly intelligent, have a strong sense of family and loyalty. So how do all these medicines work together for September's astrology? Well, Zinnia helps us remember joy in the shadow times and keep us light when the eclipses press heavy on our hearts. Sapphire helps us cut through confusion, speak with integrity, anchor to what's real, as Saturn and Neptune tangle boundaries. And Wolf reminds us that we're not meant to do this work alone. We need community, loyalty, and protection, but also sovereignty to tell our stories in our own time. And together they kind of form this triad of survival and thriving. Joy for Zinnia, clarity for Sapphire, and community for Wolf. And these are the kind of medicines we need to walk through eclipse season. So It's cool that they came up and that they're kind of working together. So as we move through September's eclipses and retrogrades, remember your medicine. Let Zinnia bring joy back. Let Sapphire keep you steady in truth, and let Wolf remind you of your voice, your timing, and your community. And together, they'll help us walk through the shadows with color, clarity, and courage.
Thanks for listening to Centered with me, Angie Yingst. If you'd like to send me a question or comment about this show or any shows, you can send them to Angie@themoonandstone.com.